the Al-Shifa Hospital has become this like flashpoint, right? What's happening? Does Hamas have like a massive underground bunker? You know, is this their central hub? Is it the command center? Meanwhile, we were seeing every single day doctors in Al-Shifa saving lives, trying to keep premature babies alive. I mean, just like the most harrowing images, people sheltering outside of it at the same time that the IDF is descending. And what has happened in this last week is that they descended and evacuated patients and or sentence them to death because patients in the ICU, many of them did not make it out. But I didn't want to focus on all the sad because there's funny, and that is the way that Israel is trying to spin all of this and spin Al-Shifa. And it's not just me, it's not just us talking about it. It's places like the BBC openly saying that the videos that they got from the Israeli military and what they were allowed access to has like, there's some inconsistencies there when it comes to all the evidence of Hamas being in Al-Shifa. Take a look at this little clip here.
It has allowed the BBC and Fox News to film at the hospital, though only locations of Israel's choice.
This is what they found.
Israel also released its own 7-minute video, which BBC Verify has analysed. A watch visible in that video suggests it was filmed a few hours before the BBC arrived. And this IDF video was posted, then deleted, then reposted, this time without a section referring to an Israeli soldier who'd been held hostage.
I don't know when this was used the last time.
Also in the video, we see a room with an MRI machine.
And if you zoom in and we get some light over here, what you'll be able to see is military equipment.
The BBC was shown the same room. And what we see in the two videos doesn't precisely match. For example, there's one gun in the IDF video, two by the time of the BBC footage. Israel has told BBC Verify this is because more weaponry and terrorist assets were discovered throughout the day.
And as always, an AK-47.
Israel also says its video is a single shot with no edits. But this appears to be an edit. We don't know the reasons for that edit, nor how significant it is. The IDF, though, says suggestions it's manipulating the media are incorrect.
I'm not manipulating you. Why would I manipulate you? So that was the BBC. And both of you guys, please weigh in, jump in. But Dina, I wanted to ask you specifically because this is very different. The sort of like, we've not been able to verify. We looked at the time of the watch. We see these inconsistencies between the IDF video and our crew that was allowed in. They're giving all these caveats and doing kind of this due diligence that like you don't see American news outlets do when it comes to what really everyone can see is just blanket propaganda on Israel's part. But what are your thoughts?
You know, I don't know if your viewers or listeners are even aware that Israel has banned foreign journalists from entering Gaza from the get-go of this war. So all we have there are these brave Palestinian journalists who are risking their lives to tell the stories of their people and getting killed while doing so. Over 50 journalists and media workers have been killed since October 7th. Most of them are Palestinians. And, you know, the journalists that do go in are basically riding on IDF tanks, and they have to agree to these terms ahead of time where Israel reviews all their footage and basically calls the shots on what they can broadcast and what they cannot. That is an epic fail in journalism. So when I see something like this, yeah, it is refreshing. Every single thing that comes out of Israel's mouth and that comes out of the IDF's mouth should be scrutinized, because these are the masters of disinformation. They have lied time and time again, and we have proved this as journalists. They did it when they killed Shireen Abu Akleh, my colleague and friend, and they've done it many times throughout this war. And so it is incumbent on everybody to practice critical thinking skills and actual journalism, which this BBC clip was a small example of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, but Sammy, aren't you swayed by this incredible 3D imaging that Israel created of the bunker underneath Al-Shifa, which, by the way, new info, apparently Israel helped build the tunnels underneath Al-Shifa, but take a look. So, I mean, if you were just listening, I mean, it's pretty tight graphics. So, like, I just feel like, whoever has the tighter graphics are the people I believe. But this is all like, I don't know, Sammy. I guess Dina, you're saying that they're the masters of propaganda, and yet it's just it's like they're not trying that hard. It feels, but Sammy,
No, they are trying. It's not fair to say they're not trying, because I'm an actor. I've submitted a lot of audition tapes, and it's really hard to get a one shot. Like when you're acting, when you're really getting into character and you're trying to portray something that you're not, it takes a lot of work. So you can see that. You can see that with they countless times already in the last 6 weeks. They've posted something, they've taken it down, they've reposted. It's like, who does that? Who does that? Content creators. Creators.
Right.
You are creating something when you do that.
Yeah. But Francesca, sorry, Sam, I didn't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go for it.
No, you mentioned that Israel helped build this. Yes, this is a known fact, and it has been a known fact for a long time. Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, even said it yesterday to Christian Amanpour that Israel did build a tunnel and a bunker under Al-Shifa Hospital decades ago, in the 80s, I believe, when they were running Shifa. It was part of an effort to expand the hospital capacity. So that's not disputed. What is disputed is that it's this command and control center for Hamas that they claim it to be. The fact of the matter is, none of the doctors, they have provided no proof for that. None of the many doctors who work there, including foreign doctors who've worked there for weeks and months, have verified this, or the many journalists that were posted there for weeks in this war, or the tens of thousands of displaced people. It is just propaganda. You attack a hospital, that is a war crime, and there's no obfuscating that.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing, right, Dina? Like, this is the thing. It's like, even if the 2 AK-47s belong to Hamas and they're underneath, somehow, or someone was underneath Al-Shifa Hospital, they're still relying on the idea that we, the international community, would somehow be okay with them shelling and bombing and emergency evacuating and sentencing to die children, injured people, refugees. Like, we're still not okay with that. And you proving, I mean, again, this is obviously, they don't even need to prove it to the people who are already on board with them. Hello, Joe Biden. But speaking of Ehud Barak, who did just say that to Amanpour, and like, she was like, wait a minute, what? You built them? He, right after the raid was complete, he tweeted this out saying, or he didn't tweet this, excuse me, this was reported that he said that the Hamas command center, no, it's in Khan Yunis, not Shifa Hospital. Khan Yunis, which is in the southern part of Gaza Strip, is the real headquarters of Hamas. This is what. So
this is Ehud Olmert, another Ehud, not to be confused with Ehud Barak, who was on Amanpour. But yeah, both Israeli leaders, former Israeli leaders.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. But like, that's the level of like seriousness that they, I guess, that they conduct themselves, or how stupid they think we are to be like, oh no. We're in a different spot now. We're in the South now. Oh, it's a different hospital. We got to raid it. And now they're raiding and attacking the Indonesian hospital in Gaza. And tens of, I don't know how many people have been killed. But it's just like, it's such a joke. It is actually such a joke. But anyway, it is a massive distraction. I just want to read a little bit of Jeremy Scahill said something I thought was really poignant. He wrote, if Hamas is decisively proven to have intentionally abused the hospital's protected status and did, in fact, actively operate a command center hidden beneath it, then it should face war crimes for having done so. Hamas, not innocent civilians, should be held accountable for these actions. At the same time, if it's proven that Israel perpetrated fraud in its relentless campaign to portray the most important hospital in Gaza as a secret Hamas military base, then the world should hold Israeli officials accountable for this grave and lethal propaganda. So too should the Biden administration, including the president himself, be made to answer for the U.S. role. I mean, I think that's really clear. He's not, saying, look, it is a war crime for Hamas to use it as a base. But like, what's interesting about these flashpoints, right, is that there's so much misinformation, and yet it does matter. Like, the truth of what was happening, I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't slow down Israel's attack on assault on Gaza, right? But it does matter that they can just sort of move on from something they clearly lied about, just like, as you mentioned, the assassination of a Shireen, who they denied that they killed her for a year and then admitted, oh, sorry, we did, even though it was a shot literally to the back of her head. But anyway, I guess maybe final thoughts on this, you guys, on the hospital. Like, should we be are we focusing on it too much, or or does it, or what do you think about that?
Not enough. I mean, the fact that like Dina said earlier, a lot of people don't even know that journalists are not allowed in there. A lot of people don't even know that CNN had to agree with Israel to basically control what ends up going out. And like you've watched the stuff that came out of CNN in the past week. It was almost just as bad as CNN's regular programming, right? Like the fact it just goes to show that everything's being manipulated at this point. And like how do we get journalists in there? Like at this point, it's like how do we even know what's true? And really all we can do is continue to amplify the Palestinian journalists who are still posting, the ones who are still alive and risking their lives. That's really all we have left.
Right.
Yeah,
Who've been labeled as Hamas propagandists.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I want to echo that. We can't stop talking about this. We can't stop talking about what happened to Shifa, what's happening to all of the hospitals right now. The fact that in the north of Gaza, there still remain hundreds of thousands of people who did not evacuate, who are still there, and they have nowhere to go when they are injured or sick, or they can't get any adequate treatment. Even the people who are going to hospitals that remain there with catastrophic injuries like limbs being blown off, lacerations, really terrible things, they cannot be properly treated at this point. They're just getting first aid.
Yeah.
And then for those who did flee south, the over 1 million people, I believe half the population that did go south, now it was never safe to begin with, but now they're even at greater risk. And, Israel's saying, oh, well, we think Hamas is south and we think the hostages are south, and they're trying to squeeze them into a smaller area in the south. There is no safe place in Gaza. Israel's just bombing indiscriminately. The death toll keeps mounting. The atrocities keep increasing. It is astounding. And these pictures, we should never be seeing so many pictures of thousands of dead children, thousands of dead civilians. This is Joe Biden's legacy. This is how he will be remembered. And the only thing that gives me a glimmer of hope is that I saw a poll yesterday that 70% of 18 to 34-year-olds do not approve of how he's handling this war. And the majority of Americans are calling for a ceasefire. The majority of Democrats support a ceasefire. Our elected officials here are not listening to us. What democracy is this here in the United States when this is the case?
I had to chew out my representative who lives near and by my house, and I saw him. I hung a sign outside his house, not to be weird, but I did. Was with my baby, and then I was like, maybe I'll run into him. I did run into him, and told him what I thought, and he was like, "Well, here's why I ceasefire. I'm calling for cessation of hostilities." I was like, "Bitch, I'm already supporting your opponent." It's so just it's depraved. He's like, I don't do things for votes. I do things for what's right. And I laughed in his face, Dina. You have to know this. Sammy, what were you going to say, though?
Oh, I was going to say even something like close to 50% of people over 65 disapprove of how Biden's handling it. And the other 50% can't hear. So.
But they're still watching CNN and
but they can see the 102 guns that were perfectly beautifully laid out with some cracks sprinkled on top.
And the terrorist named after the days of the week on the calendar.
Indeed.
By the way, we didn't even point out the fact that, many people have pointed out that an MRI machine is a massive magnet. Any metal would just gravitate towards it and stick. You can't even have jewelry on around MRI.
And the baby bottle they found. I think the baby bottle was the best piece of evidence they had.
I mean, truly. But every day you think you've read the worst story you've ever read in your life. And then the next day happens. I mean, this is the kind of thing. And we're all being gaslit, right? And you're absolutely right. So it's like,
speaking of gas.
Yes.
Fields, yeah. That's where that's the story that should be circulating more, because the thing about Americans is like they don't really care about human life. At the end of the day, Americans are so desensitized that like they don't care about human life. But as soon as you start talking economics, you might get people's attention. And the big story is, what I think really should be for Americans is how this is an exploitation of Gaza's gas, in the making, as well as the canal in the making.
So you mean natural resources?
Yeah. There's the Gaza's gas field, which is valued at something like $500 billion. Stories are coming out in small amounts. But going back,
I've seen those stories, but I just want to stress this is about land, and it has always been about land. And this is about 100%. A Zionist settler colonial project that is just since, before 1948 has been seeking to maximize Palestinian land while minimizing the number of Palestinians living on it. And what we're seeing in Gaza is first and foremost an extension of that. And it's spreading into the West Bank too, which I know you want to talk about later, Franny.
Yeah. No, let's pivot to that. But I did just want, before we leave, because it is funny, and you mentioned the days of the week, Mehdi Hassan, who's like, our boy on the inside of mainstream news over there on MSNBC, formerly of Jazeera. But, he earlier this week had this interview with a senior advisor to Netanyahu, Mark Regev. And here he's asking him about those days of the week that were listed in the Al-Shifa Hospital that were about shifts. And he was like, oh, they're names of terrorists. That's what the IDF video said. As well as, I believe it's like an Israeli official who just put out like a clip from a Lebanese film and was like, look, this shows that Palestinians are staging their own death. Like, wild misinformation. Take a look.
I said to you that your military spokesman...
you were quoting to me before Hamas numbers, Mehdi. You were quoting to me Hamas's numbers.
Because the entire UN and the human rights community and the American intelligence community on Friday said they trust those numbers. But you're dodging my question, Mark.
I'm not sure that's true.
Why did your military spokesman on Monday point to a calendar in Arabic and say these are the names of terrorists on them? That's false. Can you accept that here and now?
I'm not aware of the incident.
Let's put up the image. We have the image. You have no
I don't read Arabic. It doesn't help me. I have no comment. I'm not familiar with the incident.
Does your spokesman read Arabic?
Hang on, I have a question, Mehdi. You're a journalist. Have you made a professional mistake ever? Not intentionally, but have you made a professional mistake?
Exactly, and I own up to it.
Have you made a mistake? So can
you own up to the mistake?
So if I've made mistakes, you've made mistakes. But there's a difference between making an honest mistake and between Hamas that deliberately exaggerates numbers to suit its propaganda purposes. There's a huge difference.
So it sounds like
it's like
hold on. You said propaganda. Can we just deal with your colleague Ophir Gendelman's tweet? It's still up 7 days later. Why has it not come down? It's a Lebanese short film. We can put it on screen. It's not Palestinians faking their own injuries. Can we own up to that mistake and take that down? Is that not propaganda?
Once again, I understand that was also a mistake. And
so why is it still up 7 days later?
I'll speak to Ophir about it if you like. I'll speak to Ophir about it if you like. He's a friend of mine and a colleague. I quite like him. He's a good man.
I'll speak to Ophir about it.
He's a good man. He literally said, at one point, I'm not familiar with the internet.
Arabic? Never heard of the language. Again, they're laughing in our faces. And yeah, there are a few journalists like Mehdi Hassan who's like, not going to let something go, not going to move on, going to stick to the point, and got him to say, haven't you ever made a mistake? And this is just, guys, before we move on, these are part of that like bullshit gaslighting crocodile tears that some of these propagandists are like, oh, haven't you ever made a mistake? It's a little bit like we're supposed to feel for him or something. Like, oh God.
Well, he should have said, yeah, if I made a mistake, it didn't translate to the genocide of an entire population.
Exactly.
Like mistakes are doing right now, but
exactly. I mean, and it's also the question. Oh, so Hamas is if you say they're inflating numbers, do you mean there are fewer children who are dead? Isn't that a good thing? It's just so ridiculous. And like the last thing I'd want to say before we talk about Dina, your book and your reporting is there's also new information about, Israeli helicopters firing on those festival goers, right? That we now know that actually Hamas didn't know that there was going to be a festival on October 7th. The festival was extended. It seems like they were not a target initially. And that first responders from Israel, from the Israeli military, according to them, did not know who was a so-called terrorist and who was, a festival goer, and just kind of shot at random. And that's why you see the cars that were burned out. I mean, I remember in the initial footage of October 7th, I was like, what the fuck? Like, what is that? Like, and it's like, oh no, it makes sense. That seems like weaponry that a military like Israel had. But that's just information that's going to wash over us. We're not supposed to talk about that. And yet it's like, oh no, they might have killed their own people. Okay. I hope they free their hostages. Anyway.
Yeah, they've really perfected the art of timing when it comes to publicity. I mean, there's still people circulating 40 beheaded babies. when you float something around that intensely in the beginning, when you float a lie that around intensely, by the time it actually gets debunked, people are already on to the next thing, and most people have
100%.
accepted it as valid. And it's like the same thing with this. This should be a major story, but it's for some reason just getting slept on.
Absolutely.
My prediction is that as more time goes on and more investigations are carried out, we will learn that even more of these deaths that Israeli civilians suffered on October 7th were at the hands of Israel, and them doing things like this, like dropping bombs and seeing those crazy scenes of scorched cars, It'll be interesting. This is something that we need to keep paying attention to. But yeah, it's surprising the disregard that Israel has shown for its own civilians, not just in dropping bombs and not realizing who they're hitting, but also the lack of prioritizing the release of their own hostages as time is running out. And some of them are getting, supposedly killed in the bombings by Israel.
Of course.
Don't you care about your own citizens?
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.